Montana Territory, 1882. The small mining settlement of Silver Creek huddled in the shadow of the Rockies like a lost child against its mother's skirt. Dust swirled in golden eddies beneath a merciless sun as Knox Thornton rode into town, his eyes hard as the mountains looming behind him. 26 years of frontier life had etched permanent lines around those eyes, lines that spoke of too many harsh winters, too many empty trails, and a conviction that had settled in his bones. A man survived longer in the West if he kept to himself. The jingle of his spurs announced his arrival to the cluster of wooden buildings that passed for civilization. Knox had learned early that attachments were dangerous things out here. Folks who put down roots tended to get them ripped up by claim jumpers, outlaws, or the land itself. Better to keep moving, keep working, keep alive. The code had served him well through 8 years of cattle drives and bounty hunting. You planning to water that horse or just let him die of thirst? The voice came from the porch of the general store, belonging to a grizzled old man with a tobacco-stained beard. Knox nodded curtly, heading there now. His gelding, Trail, had carried him through 3 territories without complaint. The horse deserved better than the dusty neglect of Silver Creek, but Knox had business here, business that would keep him just long enough to collect his payment and move on. That's how he'd always done things. That's how he'd stay alive. At night, though, when the emptiness of the trail pressed in around his campfire, Knox sometimes wondered if mere survival was enough. 26 years old, and what did he have to show for it? A good horse, a reliable rifle, and not a soul in the world who'd miss him if he disappeared. But that was the way of the West. A man couldn't afford sentimentality out here. Not if he wanted to see another sunrise. The saloon was exactly what he expected, a rough-hewn cathedral to frontier vices. The air inside hung thick with tobacco smoke and the sour smell of cheap whiskey. A piano tinkled in the corner, played by hands that had given up on precision. Knox settled at the bar, ordering a whiskey and keeping his back to the wall. "You must be the man Mr. Anderson wired about," the barkeep said, sliding his drink across the scarred wood. "Come to help with the Emerson sisters' escort to Butte City." Knox nodded. 3-day ride from here. 10 days there and back, if all goes well. He didn't like escort jobs, too much responsibility, too many things that could go wrong, but the pay was good, and winter would be coming to the mountains soon. He needed the money to get him through to spring. "Well, you'll be meeting them at dinner tonight. Anderson's place. You know it." Knox shook his head. Big white house at the end of Main Street. "Can't miss it. 6 o'clock sharp." The barkeep leaned closer. "Word of advice? Miss Eleanor Emerson is the prize. Every man in 3 territories has tried courting her. Hair like spun gold, face that'd make an angel jealous. Her sister Emma." He shrugged. "Well, some say she got all the brains while Eleanor got the beauty." Knox drained his glass. "Don't much care about either. I'm just the hired gun." The barkeeper chuckled. "That's what they all say? Then they meet Eleanor." By 6 o'clock, Knox had bathed, shaved, and changed into his cleanest shirt. Not for the Emerson sisters, he told himself, but because a professional presented himself properly. Anderson's house loomed large against the darkening sky, its white clapboards gleaming like bone in the gathering twilight. A maid showed him to a parlor that seemed transported from back east, with its velvet furniture and oil paintings. For people rose as he entered, an older man with silver at his temples, a matronly woman with kind eyes, and 2 young women who could only be the Emerson sisters. Eleanor Emerson was indeed beautiful. 22 years old with golden hair arranged in elaborate curls, a blue silk dress that matched eyes the color of a summer sky, and a smile that had clearly bent men to her since childhood. Knox understood immediately why half the territory was in love with her. But it was the other sister who caught his attention. Emma Emerson stood slightly behind her sister, as if prepared to be overlooked. 24 years old with chestnut hair pulled back in a simple style, wearing a practical green dress that didn't hide her slender frame. Where Eleanor's beauty was obvious, Emma's revealed itself slowly. In intelligent hazel eyes that assessed him frankly, in the slight upturn of her lips that suggested she found most of the world quietly amusing. "Mr. Thornton." Anderson stepped forward, hand extended. "William Anderson. This is my wife Martha, and our nieces, Miss Eleanor and Miss Emma Emerson." Knox shook hands, nodding to each in turn. "Ladies, Mr. Thornton will be escorting you to your uncle's home in Butte City." Anderson explained to the sisters. He comes highly recommended for frontier travel. Eleanor beamed at him. How thrilling. A real frontiersman. I'm sure we'll have the most wonderful adventures. Emma said nothing, but Knox caught the slight narrowing of her eyes, assessing him, finding him wanting, or simply reserving judgment. He couldn't tell. Dinner was an exercise in frontier diplomacy. Eleanor chattered endlessly about her expectations for Butte City society, while Emma spoke only when addressed directly. Knox learned the sisters had come west after their parents' death in Boston, hoping to start anew with their uncle, a successful mine owner. It's just so difficult finding suitable company out here. Eleanor sighed, directing a brilliant smile at Knox. Don't you agree, Mr. Thornton? Can't say I've looked, he replied honestly. Emma spoke then, her voice quiet but clear. My sister believes the West is simply waiting to be civilized. I suspect it has its own civilization, merely different from what we know. Knox met her gaze across the table, surprised. The West has its own rules. Those who try to impose Eastern ways often don't last long. Then we shall have to adapt, Emma replied. Speak for yourself, Eleanor laughed. Uncle Thomas promised us Butte City has proper society. I've no intention of becoming a frontier woman with rough hands and sun-browned skin. Knox watched Emma's fingers tighten slightly around her fork. Her hands were already showing signs of work, not rough yet, but no longer the soft hands of an Eastern lady. He wondered what tasks she'd taken on while her sister remained untouched by frontier realities. After dinner, Anderson pulled Knox aside to discuss the journey's particulars. You'll leave day after tomorrow. The girls have some final preparations. Their trunks will follow by freight wagon. 2 young women traveling with a single male escort might raise eyebrows, Knox pointed out. Anderson's expression tightened. The Emerson name carries weight, even here. Besides, Mrs. Anderson's health prevents her traveling, and I have business that cannot wait. You come recommended as honorable as well as capable. Knox nodded, though inwardly he wondered at the wisdom of it all. The trail to Butte City crossed rough country, with dangers both natural and human. 3 travelers made a tempting target for the desperate men who haunted the territories. As he took his leave, Eleanor pressed a scented handkerchief into his hand. For luck on our journey, she explained with a coquettish smile. Emma simply nodded goodbye, but as Knox passed her in the doorway, she murmured, She's done that with every unmarried man in Silver Creek. Don't read too much into it. The blunt assessment startled a laugh from him, the first genuine laugh he'd experienced in months. Emma's eyes widened slightly at the sound, as if surprised by it as he was. For a man who believed attachments were dangerous, Knox found himself inexplicably looking forward to the journey ahead. The morning they departed dawned clear and cool, the first hint of autumn crispness in the air. Knox arrived at the Anderson home to find chaos. Eleanor in tears over the limited luggage they could take, Emma calmly repacking essentials, and the Andersons attempting to mediate between them. It's simply impossible, Eleanor wailed. How can I arrive in Butte City society without my blue silk? Or my evening slippers? The same way frontier women have managed for decades, Emma replied, her patience clearly fraying. By understanding that survival trumps fashion. Knox cleared his throat from the doorway. Miss Eleanor, the freight wagon will deliver your trunks within 2 weeks of our arrival. Miss Emma is right. We can only take what the horses can carry comfortably. Eleanor turned her tear-streaked face toward him. But surely one small trunk. No, Knox said firmly. 1 saddlebag each. Bedroll. Canteen. That's all. To his surprise, it was Emma who defused the situation, taking her sister's hands. I've packed your loveliest day dress, Ellie. You'll make your entrance in style, I promise. The rest can wait. Eleanor sniffled but allowed herself to be consoled. Knox caught Emma's eye over her sister's shoulder and saw a lifetime of such negotiations reflected there, practical compromise winning out over Eleanor's dramatic protests. An hour later, they rode out of Silver Creek, Knox on trail, the sisters on steady as provided by Anderson. Eleanor sat awkwardly in her side saddle, while Emma rode astride in split skirts that had clearly scandalized her sister. No woman of quality rides like a man, Eleanor had protested when Emma appeared in her practical traveling clothes. No woman of sense rides side saddle through mountain trails, Emma had countered. Now, as Silver Creek disappeared behind them, Knox found himself impressed by Emma's foresight. The trail ahead would test them all, and practicality would matter far more than propriety. The first day passed uneventfully, though Eleanor's complaints about the dust, the heat, and the discomfort grew more pronounced with each passing hour. Emma, by contrast, observed the landscape with quiet attention, asking Knox occasional questions about landmarks or plant life. "Have you always been a guide?" she asked as they made camp that evening. Knox shook his head, busying himself with the fire. "Started as a ranch hand. Done some cattle driving. Bounty hunting. Whatever pays." "A man without roots," she observed. He looked up sharply, but her expression held no judgment, only curiosity. "Roots get you killed out here. Yet people still plant them," Emma replied. "Families, communities, ranches, farms, they all require putting down roots. And they all risk being uprooted." The words came out harsher than he intended. Emma was quiet for a moment. "Is that why you move on? Fear of what might be lost if you stayed?" The question hit too close to truths Knox preferred not to examine. He stood abruptly. "I'll check the horses." Later, as the sisters slept in their small tent and Knox kept watch beside the dying fire, he found his thoughts circling back to Emma's question. He'd never framed his wandering life as fear before, always as wisdom, as survival strategy. But her words had slipped beneath his defenses with surgical precision. The second day brought them into the foothills, where the trail narrowed and steepened. Eleanor's complaints gave way to fearful silence as her mare picked its way along rocky paths that dropped sharply to valleys below. Emma rode with quiet competence, following Knox's instructions without question. "We'll rest here," Knox announced, stopping at a small plateau that offered grazing for the horses and a clear view of the trail behind them. "Water the horses and stretch your legs." Eleanor practically collapsed when Knox helped her down, her legs trembling from the unaccustomed riding. Emma dismounted unassisted, then went to comfort her sister. "I never imagined it would be like this," Eleanor whispered, her blue eyes wide with distress. "The maps make it seem so simple, just a line from one place to another." "Maps don't show the effort of the journey," Emma said gently. "Only the destination." Knox, pretending to adjust Trail's saddle, found himself struck again by Emma's insight. His own life had been a series of destinations with little thought for the journey between them. What had he missed in his determination to keep moving, to stay unattached? The crack of a rifle shattered his thoughts. "Down!" Knox shouted, drawing his revolver and scanning the ridge above them. The sisters dropped to the ground, Eleanor's scream piercing the air. Two more shots rang out, kicking up dirt near their horses. Trail reared, but the mares, tethered nearby, pulled frantically at their ropes. "Stay low and get behind those rocks," Knox instructed, pointing to a natural stone formation that would provide cover. "Move now, while I return fire." He fired 3 shots toward the ridge where he'd spotted movement, providing covering fire as the sisters scrambled toward safety. Emma half-dragged her sobbing sister, showing surprising strength and determination. When they were safely behind cover, Knox followed, keeping low. "Road agents," he explained grimly. "They've been watching the trail. Are they going to kill us?" Eleanor whimpered. "They want the horses and whatever valuables we're carrying," Knox replied. "Killing's messy and brings lawmen. They'd rather we surrender." "Then shouldn't we?" Eleanor asked. "Our lives are worth more than possessions." Knox shook his head. "Men like that don't leave witnesses if they can help it." Emma's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. "What do we do? They have the high ground, but probably not much patience. If we can hold out until dark, we might be able to slip away on foot." Knox checked his ammunition. 6 shots left, plus what's in my rifle with the horses. Emma reached into her boot and withdrew a small derringer. 2 more here." Knox raised an eyebrow. "My uncle insisted," she explained. "Eleanor has one too, but she's afraid of it." A voice called from the ridge. "Send out the women, and we'll let you live, mister." Knox shouted back. "Not happening." Another shot struck the rocks near them, sending chips flying. "Let me try," Emma said suddenly. Before Knox could stop her, she called out, "My sister needs medical attention. She was injured in the fall." Eleanor looked bewildered, but Emma gave her a pointed look. Understanding dawned, and Eleanor began moaning dramatically. "What are you doing?" Knox whispered. "Creating uncertainty," Emma replied. "If they think one of us is seriously injured, they might approach to investigate." "And if they do?" Emma's hand tightened on her derringer. Then there'll be closer targets. Knox stared at her, seeing something in her steady gaze that resonated with his own frontier-forged instincts. This Eastern woman understood survival in ways her sister never would. "Please," Emma called again. "She's bleeding badly." A long silence followed. Then, "We're coming down. Throw out your weapons." Knox nodded to Emma. "Get ready." When two men appeared on the trail below, approaching cautiously with rifles ready, Knox signaled to Emma. She fired her derringer at the same moment Knox unleashed his remaining revolver shots. One man fell immediately, the other staggered backward, wounded. Knox sprinted for the horses, grabbed his rifle, and returned to cover just as more shots came from the ridge. He took careful aim and fired twice. A cry of pain told him at least one shot had found its mark. "How many do you think are up there?" Emma asked, her voice remarkably composed for someone who'd just been in her first gunfight. "Hard to say. Probably one or two more." Knox reloaded his revolver. "They might decide we're too much trouble and move on." After 20 tense minutes with no further shots, Knox cautiously reconnoitered. The wounded man had crawled away, leaving a blood trail. No movement came from the ridge. "I think they've gone," he told the sisters. "But we should move quickly. Find a safer place to make camp before dark." Eleanor was still trembling, her face streaked with tears. "I can't get back on that horse." "I can't." "You must," Emma said firmly. "Our lives depend on it." Knox helped Eleanor to her feet. "Miss Emma's right. We need to put distance between us and this place." They rode hard for the next 2 hours, pushing the horses as much as the rough terrain allowed. Knox found a sheltered ravine with a small stream, defensible and hidden from the main trail. As he built a small, smokeless fire, he watched Emma tend to her sister. Eleanor had retreated into a shell-shocked silence, allowing Emma to remove her boots, wrap her in a blanket, and coax her to drink some water. "She's never experienced violence before," Emma explained quietly when she joined Knox by the fire. "None of us had, before coming west." "You handled yourself well back there," Knox said. Emma looked down at her hands. "I surprised myself. I always thought I would freeze in danger. Instead, everything became very clear. That's how you survive out here. Clarity when it counts." Knox hesitated. "Why did your family come west? You don't seem the pioneering type." A shadow crossed Emma's face. "Our parents died in a fire. The Boston house, their investments, everything gone. Uncle Thomas was our only family left, and he offered us a home." "I'm sorry," Knox said, the words feeling inadequate. Emma gave him a small smile. "Eleanor believes it's a temporary setback, that she'll marry well in Butte City and restore our fortune and position. And you? I think we need to accept that this is our world now." She gestured to the mountains rising around them, beautiful and dangerous and utterly indifferent to our Eastern sensibilities. Knox found himself studying her face in the firelight. The intelligent eyes, the determined set of her mouth, the quiet strength that seemed to have been forged rather than inherited. He'd escorted many travelers through dangerous territory, but few had shown Emma's resilience. "You should rest," he said finally. "I'll keep watch." She nodded, but paused before returning to her sister. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton, for keeping us alive today." "Knox," he said suddenly. "Out here, formality seems pointless." Her smile deepened slightly. "Knox, then. I'm Emma." As she walked away, Knox felt something shift inside him, as if a piece of himself that had been locked away had suddenly been exposed to light. He told himself it was just the aftermath of danger, the natural bond that formed between those who faced death together. But in the quiet darkness, with only the stars as witnesses, he acknowledged the truth. Emma Emerson had seen through his carefully constructed defenses with unsettling ease. And strangely, he didn't mind. The next day brought new challenges. Eleanor refused to speak, riding in a daze that concerned both Knox and Emma. The trail grew steeper, winding through pine forests where visibility decreased and the potential for ambush increased. "Will they come after us?" Emma asked as they stopped to rest the horses. Knox shook his head. "Not the same men. But word travels. 3 travelers, 2 of them women, were still a target." "Because we seem vulnerable," Emma concluded. "Yes." She straightened her shoulders. "Then we must appear less so." That evening, Emma asked Knox to teach her how to use his rifle. They set up improvised targets while Eleanor huddled by the fire, still withdrawn. "You pull it tight against your shoulder," Knox demonstrated. helps absorb the recoil. Emma mimicked his stance, her body tense with concentration. The rifle looked too large for her slender frame, but she held it with determination. Now breathe out slowly and squeeze the trigger. Don't pull. The rifle cracked, and a pine cone 100 feet away exploded. Good shot, Knox said, genuinely impressed. Emma lowered the rifle, a surprised smile lighting her face. It felt powerful. It is. Knox took the rifle back, reloading it. But power requires responsibility. Like most things of value, she agreed. Their eyes met over the barrel of the rifle, and Knox felt that strange shift again, as if the ground beneath him was no longer as solid as he'd believed. Emma looked away first, her cheeks coloring slightly in the fading light. Emma. Eleanor's voice broke the moment. Come here at once. Emma sighed, handed the rifle back to Knox, and went to her sister. Knox couldn't hear their conversation, but Eleanor's gestures were animated, her expression scandalized. When Emma returned, her face had closed off. Is everything all right? Knox asked. My sister believes I'm forgetting my place, Emma said stiffly. Apparently, learning to defend oneself is unladylike. Knox glanced at Eleanor, who was pointedly ignoring them both. She's scared. Fear makes people cling to what they know, even when what they know no longer serves them, Emma said with surprising bitterness. She still believes some gallant gentleman will rescue us from all this. She waved her hand at the wilderness around them, as if the West is merely an unpleasant interlude before returning to ballrooms and calling cards. And you? Emma looked up at the stars emerging in the darkening sky. I find I prefer this honesty. The mountains don't pretend to be anything other than what they are. Neither do you. Knox felt something catch in his chest, a recognition of kindred spirit that both thrilled and terrified him. The West doesn't forgive pretense, he said roughly. That's why I've always traveled alone. No one to protect but myself. Is that truly why? Emma's question was gentle but direct. Or is it because caring for others makes you vulnerable? Knox had no answer that wouldn't expose too much of himself. He busied himself with checking his revolver, aware of Emma's eyes still on him. I should see to the horses, he said finally, retreating from her insight. That night, as he took the first watch, Knox found his thoughts in turmoil. 3 days with the Emerson sisters had disrupted the careful isolation he'd maintained for years. Eleanor's beauty, which had captivated half the men in Silver Creek, barely registered compared to Emma's quiet strength and perceptiveness. She saw him, not just the frontiersman, the hired gun, but the man beneath. The man who had lost his family to frontier violence at 16 and vowed never to be that vulnerable again. The man who moved on before attachments could form, who measured relationships in days rather than years. The realization was unsettling. Knox had survived by keeping people at arm's length. Emma Emerson had somehow slipped past that defense in a matter of days. The 4th day of their journey brought them to the most dangerous stretch of trail, a narrow path winding along a steep mountainside. The drop to the valley below was hundreds of feet, with nothing to break a fall. We'll dismount and lead the horses, Knox instructed. Single file. I'll go first, then Miss Eleanor, then Miss Emma. Eleanor, who had emerged from her silence only to complain about the increasing cold, looked at the trail with undisguised terror. I can't. I simply cannot. Emma took her sister's hands. Yes, you can. One step at a time, holding the horse's reins. I'll be right behind you. What if I fall? Eleanor whispered. You won't, Knox said with more confidence than he felt. The trail is wider than it looks, and the horses are sure-footed. It took nearly an hour to traverse half a mile of trail, with Eleanor whimpering at every loose stone. Knox constantly looked back, checking on their progress, his eyes more often finding Emma than her sister. She moved with careful precision, one hand on her mare's bridle, the other sometimes steadying Eleanor ahead of her. When they finally reached a wider section where the trail opened onto a small plateau, Knox called a halt. Eleanor immediately collapsed onto a boulder, her face pale with exertion and fear. Emma remained standing, gazing back at the trail they'd traversed with a mixture of pride and awe. We did it, she said, smiling at Knox. We actually did it. The joy in her face struck him like a physical blow. In that moment, with her chestnut hair coming loose from its pins and her cheeks flushed with accomplishment, Emma Emerson was more beautiful than any woman Knox had ever seen. The realization terrified him. We should keep moving, he said brusquely. There's a trading post a few hours ahead where we can spend the night. Emma's smile faltered at his tone, but she nodded and turned to help her sister. The trading post was little more than a large cabin with a stable attached, run by a taciturn man named Cooper and his flathead wife, Mourning Dove. They welcomed the travelers with the cautious hospitality of those who lived far from civilization's comforts. 3 beds in the back room, Cooper told Knox. Not fancy, but clean. $5 for the night, includes supper. We'll take it. Knox agreed, relieved to have solid walls around them for the first time in days. Eleanor brightened at the prospect of a real bed, disappearing immediately to make herself presentable with what limited toiletries she'd been allowed to bring. Emma helped Mourning Dove prepare a simple meal of venison stew and cornbread, moving around the small kitchen as if she'd been doing frontier cooking all her life. Knox watched her from his seat by the fire, where he was cleaning his weapons. There was something mesmerizing about the way she adapted, not just surviving but engaging with this new world. Eleanor fought against the frontier. Emma embraced it. At supper, Cooper shared news of the trail ahead. Had a man through yesterday, said there's trouble in the mountain pass. Blackfeet raiding party hit a wagon train. Knox frowned. Recent. 4-5 days ago. Might be gone by now, might not. Cooper shrugged. They're restless this year. Government promises ain't being kept. Eleanor gasped. Indians? Actual hostile Indians? We can't possibly continue. The Blackfeet have reason for their anger, Mourning Dove said quietly. My people have made peace, but others remember broken treaties. Emma looked at Knox. What do you think we should do? He considered their options. The main pass is the most direct route to Butte City. There's another way. Adds 3 days to the journey but avoids Blackfeet territory. 3 more days of this. Eleanor wailed. I cannot bear it. 3 more days of life seems preferable to the alternative, Emma said sharply. She turned to Knox. I trust your judgment. Her faith in him was both gratifying and terrifying. Knox had only his own life to consider for so long that the weight of responsibility for these women, for Emma, pressed on him like a physical burden. We'll take the longer route, he decided. Leave at first light. Later, as the sisters retired to their room and Knox prepared his bedroll near the fire, Cooper joined him with a bottle of whiskey. Unusual to see a man traveling with 2 unmarried women, the trader observed, pouring 2 generous measures. Especially ones like that. Knox accepted the drink, but said nothing. The blonde one's what most men look for out here, Cooper continued. Pretty face, soft hands. But the other one? He nodded appreciatively. She's got frontier written all over her. Adapts. Sees what needs doing and does it. They're my employers, Knox said shortly. Nothing more. Cooper gave him a knowing look. Tell that to your eyes, son. You watch the quiet one like a man dying of thirst watches water. Knox drained his whiskey in one swallow. You're imagining things. Maybe, Cooper conceded. Or maybe I recognize the look because I wore it myself once. He glanced toward the kitchen where his wife was finishing the cleaning. 22 years ago. Best decision I ever made was staying put instead of moving on. Knox stood abruptly. I'll check on the horses. Outside in the stable, with only Trail for company, Knox finally confronted the truth he'd been avoiding. He was falling for Emma Emerson, a woman from a different world, with different expectations, different dreams. A woman who deserved more than a rootless drifter with nothing to offer but a lifetime of running. The realization settled in his chest like a stone. For the first time in years, Knox wished he'd built something. A home, a ranch, anything that might be worthy of a woman like Emma. But wishing couldn't change the reality. In 4 more days, they would reach Butte City, and he would collect his pay and ride away. That was the only future he could imagine. The only one that made sense. Morning brought heavy clouds and the threat of early snow. Knox studied the sky with concern as they saddled the horses. Weather's turning, Cooper confirmed. Might want to wait it out. Knox shook his head. Better to get through the lower elevations before the snow hits. We can shelter at Miller's Creek if necessary. They bid goodbye to the traders and set out, the mood somber beneath the leaden sky. Eleanor had wrapped herself in every layer she possessed, her complaints about the cold increasing with each mile. Emma rode in silence, her expression thoughtful as she watched the changing landscape. By midday, the first snowflakes began to fall, gently at first, then with increasing urgency. We need to find shelter, Knox called over the rising wind. There's a line shack used by ranchers about 2 miles ahead. The snow thickened, reducing visibility to mere yards. Knox led them through stands of pine, following landmarks only his experienced eye could discern. The sisters huddled in their saddles, faces buried in scarves against the biting cold. When the small cabin finally appeared through the curtain of white, it seemed like a mirage. Knox dismounted quickly, checking the interior before helping Eleanor and then Emma down from their horses. "It's not much, but it'll keep us alive," he said, leading the horses to a lean-to attached to one side of the cabin. Inside, the single room held a stone fireplace, a rough table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot. Knox immediately set about building a fire while the sisters shook snow from their clothes. "Only one bed," Eleanor noted with dismay. "You and Emma take it," Knox said. "I'll sleep by the fire." Once the fire was blazing, the cabin warmed quickly. Knox went out to tend to the horses, battling the now-blinding snow to feed and water them. When he returned, stomping snow from his boots, he found Emma alone by the fire. "Where's your sister?" he asked, hanging his wet coat near the flames. "Resting," Emma replied. The cold exhausted her. She held out a tin cup of coffee. "I found supplies on the shelf. Hope the owner won't mind." Knox accepted the cup gratefully, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Line shacks are stocked for emergencies. Unwritten rule of the frontier: take what you need, replace it when you can. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the wind howling outside. Knox was acutely aware of Emma beside him, of the way the firelight played across her features, of the slight curve of her lips as she sipped her coffee. "How long do you think we'll be here?" she asked finally. "Depends on the storm. Could be a day, could be 3. Knox stared into the fire. "Changes our timeline for reaching Butte City." Emma nodded, seeming unconcerned by the delay. "Eleanor will be devastated. She's counting the hours until civilization." "And you?" She considered the question seriously. "I find I'm in less of a hurry than when we started. There's something compelling about this journey. Most people can't wait to be done with trail travel," Knox observed. "I'm discovering I'm not most people." Emma smiled slightly, much to my sister's dismay. "She doesn't understand you." "Few do." Emma's eyes met his. "But I think perhaps you might." The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken possibilities. Knox found himself leaning toward her almost unconsciously, drawn by something more powerful than his well-honed instinct for self-preservation. A log shifted in the fire, breaking the spell. Knox stood abruptly. "I should check our supplies, see what we have to work with." Emma's expression flickered with something: disappointment? Resignation? Before she nodded. "I'll help." The storm raged through the night and into the next day. The 3 of them settled into an uneasy coexistence in the confined space, Eleanor alternating between complaints and silence, Emma keeping busy with small tasks, Knox fighting his growing awareness of her presence. By the second night, the snow had stopped, but drifts several feet high surrounded the cabin. Knox stood in the doorway, assessing their situation. "We'll need to wait for it to settle some," he told the sisters. "Horses can't manage those drifts." Eleanor burst into tears. "We'll die here, in the middle of nowhere." "We're perfectly safe," Emma assured her. "We have shelter, food, firewood. The snow will melt enough to travel in a day or 2. "You don't understand," Eleanor cried. "Uncle Thomas is expecting us. He's arranged introductions, a reception. My entire future depends on making the right impression." Emma's patience visibly frayed. "Your future depends on surviving, Ellie. Something you seem determined to make as difficult as possible." Eleanor turned on her sister with sudden venom. "Of course you don't care. What future awaits you in Butte City? No man there will look twice at you when they could have me instead." Emma recoiled as if struck. Knox saw the hurt flash across her face before she masked it with composure. "If that's what you think of me, of my prospects, then you never knew me at all," Emma said quietly. She grabbed her coat. "I need some air." Before Knox could stop her, she pushed past him into the snow. He hesitated, torn between following her and dealing with the sobbing Eleanor. "She shouldn't be out there alone," he said finally. "The cold." "Let her go," Eleanor sniffed. "She's always been dramatic in her own quiet way." Knox stared at the younger sister incredulously. "Your sister has kept you alive on this journey. She's adapted to every challenge while you've done nothing but complain." Eleanor's blue eyes widened in shock. How dare you speak to me that way? I am a lady. You're a child, Knox said flatly. Playing at being a lady while your sister does the work of surviving. He grabbed his coat. I'm going after Emma. He found her not far from the cabin, standing in a small clearing where the wind had swept the snow into fantastic shapes. She turned at his approach, quickly wiping tears from her face. You shouldn't be out here, she said. It's freezing. Neither should you. Knox moved closer, concern overriding his usual caution. Your sister didn't mean what she said. Emma gave a hollow laugh. Oh, but she did. She's always meant it. Poor Emma, so plain compared to her sister. So practical, so unfinishing school. She looked up at the night sky, where stars glittered between breaks in the clouds. Do you know what it's like to live your entire life in someone else's shadow? To be defined by what you're not rather than what you are. Yes, Knox said simply. I do. She looked at him then, really looked at him. Tell me. Knox had never shared his past with anyone. But standing there in the snow with Emma, the words came unbidden. My father was a legend in these parts. Knox Thornton Sr. Fastest gun, straightest shot, bravest heart. Everyone knew him, respected him, feared him. What happened to him? Ambushed by a gang he'd crossed years before. They killed him and my mother. My sister. Knox's voice roughened with the memory. I was 16 out hunting. Came back to find them gone. Emma reached for his hand, her fingers cold against his. I'm so sorry. After that, I tried to live up to his name. Be as tough, as fearless. But all I learned was that caring about people gets them killed. He looked down at their joined hands. Or gets you killed trying to protect them. So you chose to be alone, Emma said softly. To care about no one. It seemed safer. And now, the question hung between them, laden with meaning. Knox looked into her eyes and saw understanding there. And something more, something that called to the part of him he'd buried alongside his family. Now I'm not sure of anything, he admitted. Emma stepped closer, her face tilted up to his. Neither am I. Except one thing. What's that? That sometimes the risk is worth taking. Later, Knox would remember who moved first, him leaning down or her rising on her toes. But in the moment, it seemed they came together by mutual gravity. Her lips were cold at first, then warm against his. His arms circled her waist, pulling her closer, while her hands came to rest against his chest. When they broke apart, both breathing quickly, Knox felt as though something fundamental had shifted in his world. The boundaries he'd so carefully maintained for years had dissolved in the space of a kiss. We should go back, Emma whispered, though she made no move to pull away. Eleanor will be worried. Let her worry, Knox said, brushing a snowflake from Emma's cheek. For once. They returned to the cabin eventually, to find Eleanor asleep on the cot. Knox added wood to the fire while Emma hung their snow-dampened coats to dry. They settled side by side before the flames, shoulders touching, fingers occasionally brushing. Each contact a silent affirmation of what had passed between them. What happens when we reach Butte City? Emma asked finally, voicing the question that haunted them both. Knox had been asking himself the same thing. His life had been defined by movement, by the next horizon. Staying in one place, committing to one person, went against every instinct he'd cultivated. I don't know, he admitted. I've never planned beyond the next job. And if the next job were to stay? Emma's question was tentative, vulnerable in a way that made Knox's chest ache. I'm not the settling kind, he said, the words feeling hollow even as he spoke them. I don't have anything to offer someone like you. Someone like me? Emma turned to face him fully. What kind of person do you think I am? Someone who deserves stability, a home, safety. And if what I want is something else entirely? Her eyes reflected the firelight, steady and challenging. If what I want is someone who sees me for who I really am, not who society expects me to be. Someone who understands that safety isn't always found in walls and locks, but in knowing your own strength. Knox had no answer that wouldn't expose the last of his defenses. Instead, he reached for her hand, interlacing their fingers. Let's get through the journey first, he said. Then we can talk about what comes after. The snow began melting the next day, and by the fourth morning since the storm, the trail was passable again. They left the lined shack, Emma and Knox sharing glances that Eleanor, in her self-absorption, failed to notice. The last leg of their journey passed without incident. The weather cleared, the trails dried, and no further dangers presented themselves. Knox found himself simultaneously wishing for more time alone with Emma and dreading their arrival in Butte City, where their paths would inevitably diverge. Emma seemed to share his conflict, alternating between animated conversation and pensive silence. Only Eleanor's mood improved steadily as they approached civilization, her complaints giving way to excited speculation about the society awaiting her. Uncle Thomas wrote that the mine owners' families have formed quite an exclusive circle, she told them as Butte City came into view on the horizon. I shall have to have new dresses made immediately, of course. Uncle promised an allowance. Knox watched Emma's face as her sister chattered on about balls and suitors. Her expression revealed nothing, but he'd come to recognize the slight tension in her shoulders that signaled her disagreement. Butte City proved to be larger than Silver Creek, but still raw compared to eastern cities. A bustling mining town where wealth and desperation existed side by side. Thomas Emerson's house stood on the hillside above the town, an imposing structure that announced its owner's prosperity. As they rode up to the iron gates, Knox felt a weight settle in his chest. This was the end of their journey. His job was complete. Servants emerged to take their horses. A distinguished man with a silver beard came down the steps. Thomas Emerson himself, arms outstretched to welcome his nieces. Eleanor, Emma, thank God you've arrived safely. He embraced each in turn. We were beginning to worry when you didn't arrive as scheduled. We encountered some difficulties, Uncle Thomas, Emma explained. Mr. Thornton navigated us through them with great skill. Thomas turned to Knox, extending his hand. Then I owe you my gratitude, sir. My nieces are my only family. Knox shook the offered hand. They're resourceful women. Miss Emma especially proved quite capable in frontier conditions. Did she now? Thomas glanced at his elder niece with surprise. Well, come in, all of you. You must be exhausted. Inside, the house revealed Eastern luxury transported to the frontier. Crystal chandeliers, velvet furnishings, paintings in gilt frames. Eleanor sighed with visible relief at these signs of civilization, while Emma's expression remained neutral. After refreshments were served and the sisters had been shown to their rooms to rest, Thomas invited Knox to his study to settle their business. Anderson wired that you agreed to $200 for safe passage, Thomas said, counting bills from a desk drawer. I'm adding a $50 bonus for delivering them through that unexpected storm. Knox accepted the money, though it suddenly seemed inadequate compensation for a journey that had changed him so fundamentally. Thank you, sir. Will you be staying in Butte City? Thomas asked. I could put in a word with the mine security office if you're looking for steady work. The offer caught Knox off guard. Steady work. In Butte City. Near Emma. I haven't decided, he said carefully. I usually move on after a job is complete. Thomas nodded, seemingly unsurprised. Well, the offer stands if you change your mind. We'll be hosting a small reception tomorrow evening to welcome the girls. You're welcome to attend, of course, as thanks for your service. Knox should have declined immediately. Social gatherings with Butte City's elite were as far from his natural habitat as the moon. But the thought of seeing Emma again, of having one more conversation before he rode away, proved too tempting. Thank you, he heard himself say. I'd be honored. He took a room at a modest hotel in town, feeling strangely untethered now that his responsibility for the Emerson sisters had ended. For the first time in years, Knox found himself without a clear next destination, without an immediate purpose driving him forward. That evening, he sat in the hotel saloon, nursing a whiskey and turning down offers of card games and companionship. His thoughts kept returning to Emma, to her quiet strength, her insightful observations, the way she'd felt in his arms that night in the snow. You look like a man wrestling with demons, said a voice beside him. Knox turned to find Thomas Emerson settling onto the neighboring bar stool. The older man ordered a brandy before continuing. I thought I might find you here. Small towns have few options for solitary contemplation. Knox nodded warily, just having a quiet drink before moving on. So you've decided to leave, then? Thomas studied him over the rim of his glass. Despite my offer? The frontier's in my blood, Knox said, the familiar explanation feeling hollow for the first time. I'm not suited to staying in one place. Thomas sipped his brandy. Emma told me about your journey. Quite the adventure, by her account. Knox tensed. What exactly did she tell you? Enough to make me curious about the man who impressed my practical niece. Thomas set down his glass. She's always been the sensible one, you know. Even as a child. While Eleanor collected dolls and dreamed of princes, Emma was reading maps and asking questions that confounded her tutors. Knox said nothing, unsure where this conversation was heading. When my brother died, leaving his daughters penniless, I brought them west because I had no choice, Thomas continued. Eleanor saw it as temporary exile. But Emma, he smiled slightly. Emma saw it as opportunity. She's been studying mining operations, business ledgers, territorial law. Did you know that? Knox shook his head, though he wasn't surprised. Emma's intelligence and curiosity had been evident throughout their journey. I had planned to announce it at tomorrow's reception, but perhaps you should know now, Thomas said. I'm naming Emma as heir to my mining interests and property. Knox stared at him, stunned. What about Eleanor? Eleanor will receive a generous dowry and allowance. She'll marry well. She's beautiful enough to ensure that. Thomas's expression turned serious. But the business requires someone with Emma's mind, her adaptability, her strength. She deserves it, Knox said honestly. She's remarkable. Yes, she is. Thomas studied him intently, which is why I find myself curious about your hasty departure. Most men would be calculating how to court a woman about to become one of the wealthiest in the territory. Knox bristled. I'm not most men. Clearly not. Thomas finished his brandy. Well, should you decide to attend tomorrow evening, you might be interested to know that Emma will be in the garden at 8. She finds large gatherings overwhelming and usually slips away for air. He stood, placing money on the bar. Good evening, Mr. Thornton. After Thomas left, Knox ordered another whiskey, his thoughts in turmoil. Emma was about to become an heiress to a mining fortune. Any future with her seemed even more impossible now. A drifter with no prospects and a woman with everything before her. And yet Thomas's words nagged at him. Why tell him about Emma's future inheritance? Why mention her habits at social gatherings? Knox spent a restless night, alternating between packing his few possessions and unpacking them again. By dawn, he'd made and unmade the decision to leave a dozen times. When morning came, he found himself walking to the telegraph office rather than the livery stable. The message he sent was brief. To William Anderson, Silver Creek. Arrived safely. Stop considering your friend's job offer. Stop. Will advise stop. Knox, it wasn't a commitment to stay, he told himself. Just a postponement of leaving. That evening, Knox dressed in his best clothes. A dark suit he'd purchased years ago for a job that required blending with townsfolk rather than frontiersmen. It felt restrictive compared to his usual attire, but as he studied his reflection in the hotel mirror, he had to admit he looked respectable, if uncomfortable. The Emerson mansion blazed with lights visible from throughout the town. Carriages lined the circular drive, discharging Butte City's elite, mine owners, bankers, merchants, and their elaborately dressed wives and daughters. Knox almost turned back twice before forcing himself up the steps and presenting his invitation to the butler at the door. Inside, the grand foyer opened onto a ballroom where a small orchestra played. Servants circulated with champagne and delicacies. Ladies in silk and satin twirled with gentlemen in formal wear. Eleanor held court near the fireplace, resplendent in blue silk that matched her eyes, surrounded by admiring men. She caught sight of Knox and nodded coolly in his direction, but made no move to speak to him. Thomas Emerson spotted him and came over, shaking his hand warmly. Mr. Thornton, I'm pleased you decided to join us. Thank you for the invitation, Knox said, scanning the room. It's quite a gathering. Thomas chuckled. The prospect of two unmarried, well-connected young ladies tends to draw a crowd. He checked his pocket watch. It's nearly 8, isn't it? Knox nodded, understanding the hint. I thought I might get some air. The crowd, of course. The garden is through those doors. Thomas pointed toward glass doors at the far end of the ballroom. Most refreshing this time of evening. Knox made his way through the throng, feeling increasingly out of place among the polished socialites. When he finally stepped onto the terrace, the cool night air was a relief. Stone steps led down to a formal garden where lanterns hung from tree branches, casting pools of gentle light across manicured paths. And there, seated on a bench beside a small fountain, was Emma. She wore a deep green dress that complemented her chestnut hair, which had been arranged in an elegant style that nevertheless allowed a few curls to escape around her face. As Knox approached, she looked up, surprise and pleasure illuminating her features. You came, she said, rising to meet him. I wasn't sure you would. Neither was I, Knox admitted. Social gatherings aren't my natural habitat. Nor mine. Emma smiled, gesturing to the garden around them. Hence my escape. They stood in silence for a moment, the music from the ballroom floating down to them. Emma looked different here, more polished, more the society lady she'd been raised to be. And yet beneath the elegant dress and styled hair, Knox could still see the woman who'd faced down road agents and mountain trails with quiet courage. Your uncle tells me you're to inherit his business interests, Knox said finally. Emma's eyebrows rose. He told you that? Before announcing it publicly. Last night. He found me at my hotel. I see. Emma studied his face. And is that why you came tonight? To congratulate the new heiress? The question carried a hint of challenge. Knox recognized it as the same directness that had disarmed him on the trail, Emma's unwillingness to hide behind social niceties. I came because I couldn't leave without seeing you again, he said honestly. Even though I know I should. Should you? Emma took a step closer. Why? Because you have a future here. Prospects. A place in society. Knox gestured toward the mansion. I have nothing to offer that matches that. You still don't understand, do you? Emma shook her head, a mixture of fondness and frustration in her expression. I've spent my entire life being judged by what others think I should want. By what would suit a proper Boston lady. By what would please my parents. By what would help Eleanor shine brighter. She reached for his hand, her fingers warm against his. For the first time, someone saw me. Not as Eleanor's plain sister or Thomas's sensible niece or a potential advantageous match. Just me. Emma. Knox felt something break loose inside him. A dam holding back emotions he'd denied for years. I'm not good at staying in one place, he said, his voice rough. I've spent a decade running from attachments, from anything that might hurt if I lost it. I know. Emma's eyes held his, unwavering. That's your choice to make. But before you decide, I want you to know that I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I'm asking if who you are might include room for someone else. What about your life here? Your inheritance? Uncle Thomas is giving me the mining operations because I understand them, because I can run them. A hint of steel entered Emma's voice. Not because he expects me to sit in drawing rooms and host tea parties. I intend to be in the field, in the offices, working alongside the men who actually know the business. She smiled suddenly. In fact, he mentioned needing someone to oversee security for the more remote operations. Someone who knows the territory, who can handle trouble if it arises. Knox stared at her. You're offering me a job? Uncle Thomas is offering you a job, Emma corrected. I'm offering something else entirely. Before Knox could respond, the glass doors opened and Eleanor's voice carried across the terrace. Emma, Uncle Thomas is looking for you. The announcement. Emma sighed. I have to go back. I know. Knox released her hand reluctantly. Go. We can talk later. She hesitated, then reached up to touch his face. Promise you won't leave town without saying goodbye. I promise. Knox watched her ascend the stairs, green silk swishing around her ankles, back straight and head high. He remained in the garden, thinking about choices and consequences, about paths taken and not taken, about the cost of running and the risk of staying. Inside, he heard Thomas Emerson's voice raised in formal announcement, followed by a swell of surprised murmurs and then applause. He pictured Emma standing beside her uncle, accepting congratulations with the same quiet dignity she'd shown throughout their journey. The Emma Emerson who'd emerged from that journey was not the same woman who had left Silver Creek. She discovered her own strength, her own adaptability, qualities that had always been within her but had needed the crucible of frontier challenges to reveal themselves fully. And Knox Thornton was not the same man either. The walls he'd built after his family's deaths had seemed impenetrable, necessary for survival. Yet Emma had slipped through them with disarming ease, showing him that true strength might lie in connection rather than isolation. As the celebration continued inside, Knox made his decision. It wasn't about the job offer, tempting as it was. It wasn't about Emma's inheritance or status. It was about the truth he could no longer deny. For the first time since he was 16 years old, he wanted to stay. When Emma returned to the garden an hour later, she found him still there, seated on the bench by the fountain. You're still here, she said, relief evident in her voice. I was afraid that I'd run. Knox stood, closing the distance between them. I considered it. Old habits. And I realized something. Knox took her hands in his. The frontier taught me that survival means never putting down roots, never letting anyone close enough to become a weakness. For 10 years, I've measured my life in miles traveled, in dangers avoided, in attachments prevented. Emma waited, her eyes steady on his face. But these past 2 weeks with you have shown me what I've been missing. You faced every danger with courage, adapted to every challenge with grace. You didn't need rescuing, you needed a partner. Yes, Emma whispered. That's exactly what I need. I can't promise I'll ever be completely comfortable with staying in one place, Knox admitted. There might always be part of me that looks to the horizon, but I'd like to try building something here. With you. Emma's smile bloomed slowly, like a flower turning toward the sun. That's all I'm asking for. A chance to discover what we might become together. Knox drew her into his arms, no longer caring who might see from the terrace above. Your uncle's job offer, did he mean it? Every word, Emma assured him. He needs someone who understands the territory, who can handle the rougher elements that sometimes threaten the mining operations. And how would he feel about his security chief courting his niece and heir? Emma laughed, the sound bright in the night air. He's the one who suggested I might find you in the hotel saloon last night. I believe he's already given his approval. Then Miss Emerson, Knox said formally, though his eyes danced with newfound hope. May I have the honor of calling on you properly? Perhaps tomorrow for dinner. You may, Mr. Thornton. Emma's expression turned mischievous. Though I warn you, if you're expecting a proper Boston lady, you'll be sorely disappointed. I've developed quite a taste for frontier living. I wouldn't have it any other way, Knox said, bending to kiss her. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient courses. Below, in Butte City, new silver was being pulled from the earth daily, changing fortunes and futures. And here, in this garden, two people who had found each other against all odds embraced the greatest risk of all, the risk of love in a dangerous land. 1 year later, Knox Thornton stood on the porch of a newly built ranch house overlooking a valley 15 miles outside Butte City. Behind him, Emma emerged from the front door, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. Riders coming, Knox said, nodding toward the distant trail. Looks like your uncle and sister. Emma came to stand beside him, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. Right on time for once. Eleanor must have rushed her preparations. Knox smiled, still marveling at how easily they'd fallen into partnership. In business, in the building of their home, in life. Thomas Emerson had proven as good as his word, appointing Knox to oversee security for his mining operations. The job allowed Knox to use his frontier skills while providing the stability he'd never thought he wanted. Emma, meanwhile, had shocked Butte City society by taking an active role in the family business, traveling to mining sites, reviewing operations, and proving herself as capable in commerce as she'd been on the trail. Their wedding 6 months earlier had been small but joyful, with Thomas beaming proudly and Eleanor managing to look both genuinely happy for her sister and slightly bewildered at the turn of events. As the carriage approached, Knox slipped his arm around Emma's waist. Ready for this? For Eleanor's dramatic retelling of every slight she's endured since her engagement? As ready as I'll ever be. Emma leaned against him. She does seem happy, though. Mr. Peterson clearly adores her. Some men prefer obvious beauty, Knox said, pressing a kiss to his wife's temple. Wiser men look deeper. Emma turned to face him fully, her hazel eyes warm with love. Are you saying you're wiser than most men, Mr. Thornton? I'm saying I'm the luckiest, Knox replied, drawing her closer. I almost rode away from the best thing that ever happened to me. But you didn't, Emma reminded him. You stayed. And in that simple truth lay everything Knox had never known he needed. Not just survival, but life in its fullest measure. With Emma at his side, the vast frontier no longer seemed a place to escape through, but a place to build upon. Together, they had created something neither could have imagined alone. A home that honored both the freedom of the open trail and the strength found in putting down roots. As Thomas's carriage pulled into the yard and Eleanor waved excitedly from the window, Knox and Emma moved forward together to welcome their family. Another step in the journey they had only just begun.